I was raised in a liberal Jewish household, and as a child, God to me was this very distant being who you had to go to a house of worship to visit. We hardly ever talked about him at home, so I really didn't know him all that well. And in about third or fourth grade, I had a friend who taught me that there was the Old Testament and the New Testament, and that Jews read out of the Old Testament, and that the Christians read out of the New Testament, and that Jesus was their Messiah. I knew that he had died on the cross, but I did not know his story at all. I had gone to temple a little bit throughout childhood. I could sing the songs, the hymns. I read the words in Hebrew, but I didn't really know what they meant. And I never thought to ask somebody to explain them to me, so I really had no sense of what everything meant. As I got older, I stopped practicing Judaism, especially when I went to college. It just was not something I did anymore, and I was also studying biology, and so I came to believe that science and God maybe could not share the same platform, and I even questioned the very existence of God. As I entered adulthood, my knowledge of Christianity was really limited, and at the time I had met some believers, but I felt like they were trying to push their religion on me, and that made me really uncomfortable. At the same time, as I got older, I met other believers who had this sense of inner joy that I could sense about them, and I realized that I really envied that in them. When I met my husband, I knew that he was a Christian. At the time, he wasn't attending a church regularly, but we talked a little bit about religion, and at one point he shared his testimony with me. But to me, it felt like he wasn't imposing his belief on me, rather he was just trying to explain how he came to believe. And that story opened up the possibility in my mind that God actually does possibly exist. I wasn't quite there yet, but I started thinking about him that way. So when our kids were fairly young, my husband expressed an interest in searching for a church home. So we started attending a church, and I was also working for a church. And so with those two sources, I was able to start reading the Bible a little bit at a time. By then I knew Jesus' story, but I still didn't believe. I didn't really have faith yet. But I was hoping that in reading the Bible, I would be doing research, learning, and maybe at that point I would figure out what faith was and maybe find my own. I also got to know my mother-in-law really well, and she talked a lot about how she speaks to God every day, that he's there with her all the time whenever she needs him. And that whole concept that God can be anywhere you need him to be, rather than you need to go to a house of worship, that was novel to me, and it kind of opened my eyes a little bit. So I kept on reading the Bible, wasn't there yet. I started attending a Bible study that started reading through the Bible beginning in Genesis. And I remember a couple of lessons where we read the Ten Commandments and also the laws that followed on how to basically live your life. And it struck home to me how fundamental these laws and rules are, and that our government is based on them, and that our society's moral compass is based on them. I mean, if you ask anybody right from wrong and how they know this, they may not realize, but it comes from the Bible. I really firmly believe that. So I started believing that at least the Bible that I was reading was the source of truth. And I think of it as truth in all capital letters. It was just really striking home to me. So I kept on reading, and I realized that I was waiting for this big, momentous occasion to say, here's your faith, you're going to believe. But that wasn't happening. But I kept on reading. I kept on going to church, learning further in the Old and New Testaments. And I was reading at home as well. And then I also saw a couple of testimonials given by Jewish people and their stories of how they were curious about Jesus and they were led to read the New Testament. And these were people who knew their Old Testament way deeper than I ever did. And they knew that the prophecy was fulfilled in Jesus being the Messiah, and they accepted him as their Messiah. So I kept on reading a little further, still waiting for that big moment. And one day I called myself out. I said, "You're being a coward. You need to take that leap of faith. You've been reading about people taking leaps of faith in the New Testament and how it's transformed them. So you need to go for it." So one evening after dinner, I took my husband aside and I said, "Hey, I want you to watch this video, and then I want to talk to you about something." So I sat him down and had him watch the testimonial given by one of the Jewish people that really resonated with me. And after we finished the video, I looked at him and I said, "I've barely read much of the Bible, but I can tell you today that I believe it to be true. I believe who Jesus is and that he is the Messiah, and I accepted Jesus." And of course, he was very happy to hear that. And I can now say that since the moment I accepted Jesus as my Lord and Savior, I have felt this inner peace and joy and comfort. From the moment I wake up to the moment I go to sleep, I feel that God is with me. I pray every day now, not out of obligation, but out of desire to praise and thank him, and because I love him. And I'm just so glad that I took that leap of faith, that I mustered the courage, because it has transformed me on the inside. And now I can confidently say that I possess that peace and joy that I envied so much in other believers.